have you here gathered today for our third lecture in this series of lectures, the third and final for this round, by Dr. Mohamed, Abdou, author of Islam and Anarchism, Teacher Prize 2022. Just a quick reminder that our first evening, the topic was 1492 and the cosmic war between Earth Eaters and the worlds of the below. Last night, we started dreaming together dangerously beyond the state, and had some thoughts about anarcho-Islam, decolonization, and relationship to land, foundational relationship to land. And today's topic is an ethics of disagreement and politics of hospitality, a queer feminist Islam where all worlds fit. And as I mentioned in previous evenings, this is part of a lecture series that's going to be turned into a publication with Kairos Press, our imprint with Camp Press. And please help me welcome Dr. Mohamed Abdou.
اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي امري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. All gratitude and thanks be to all of you, those online, those present, Raoul, Andre, Heather, Sean, my sister Kiki, Hannah, and Zachary. May Allah bless this very land, the holy people, who I stand on, and who I stand with, as I ponder, and I will continue to ponder in intent, purpose, and action, now, today, tomorrow, the day after, till February 20th, and even beyond, when I depart to Lene de Navi territory, what is known as New York City. What becomes of these spaces, these lands we, you, I stand on? I continue to reflect what I bore witness to, what I lived, what I breathed, of names still foreign to me. I am not as I am yesterday, the day before, nor are you, frankly speaking. And so long as there is breath in me, I will ponder and preponderance on this wakeful, half-asleep journey. So I ask here now and forever for your forgiveness in advance, especially for my shortcomings in what I say and how I say it. What my tongue uttered and if I injured. What does it mean to be a citizen of a country on the wrong side of every anti-colonial and liberationist decolonial struggle on this earth, our Lord? What does it mean to bear mountains, to love in mosques, churches, synagogues, in temples, in basilicas, on grass, on concrete, forests, amongst earth and in holy spaces? Every rock, every pebble, every grain of sand, every ground, and every inch of this land. The morning has already begun. But this is the end where the end is the beginning, is the end is the beginning again. Such is the cycle of life. That is what the way that means, as I described yesterday. To get straight to it. I'm not sure whether I'll be able to cover what all needs to be said, so forgive me for that. Sally Abdullah Morsi, behind me, described her family as a simple family. My father worked with the railway, and my mother a household wife. She was the fifth child, two older brothers, two sisters. She attended a French school in Egypt, and according to Abdullah, her parents naturally assumed that her gradual struggles with her gender were related to religious and cultural differences at her school. In addition to her own keen interest in learning the medicinal basis and medical basis of her case, and to heal, she was seeking to heal. That journey led Abdullah's family to transfer her to Al-Azhar, the most preeminent Islamic institution in the world, originally an Ismaili institution, a Shiite institution before it became a Sunni institution underneath who? Salah ad-Din al-Qayyubi, who freed Jerusalem of the Crusaders, and he was a Kurd. But they transferred her to Al-Azhar so she may learn religion there. In 1982, this 19-year-old medical student at Al-Azhar University, or as a medical student at Al-Azhar University, Abdullah began consulting the psychologist, Salwa Labib, about her struggle with her gender, and what Abdullah believed to be a hormonal imbalance ever since she was in her mother's womb. Labib, the psychologist, examined Abdullah for 3 years and first attempted to restore Sayyid's male sexual identity. Salwa's insistence on restoring Abdullah's male identity is typical of clinical therapies, phallic, masculine power, which is based on, of course, as we know, heteronormative assumptions that are deaf or render themselves deaf to the voice of unreason. Of course, psychoanalytic and psychiatric contract, or the psychoanalytic and psychiatric contract, is meant to reduce the states lived by any one of us, to translate them into fantasies, daddy, mommy, me, and into sexual disturbances. When the attempted psychiatric restoration, though, failed, Gerges told Abdullah that in order for the person to be a complete male, her spirit and her psyche, not only her anatomy, or their anatomy, and external physique must be male. Otherwise, it's like being chained to two moving trains in opposite directions. It tears you apart. The boys, yet again. After 3 years of treatment and after researching gender reassignment and transgender concerns in gynecology, psychiatry, and plastic surgery, Abdullah simply decided to become Sami because, as she notes, I was never saved. In 1985, Salwa Gerges, psychiatrist, referred Abdullah to another psychologist, Hani Najib, who recommended gender reassignment surgery, and that ushered in an approximately 2-year process of hormone therapy. While she awaited surgery, Abdullah experimented with cross-dressing while attending her Azhar classes, where she began to experience sexual harassment. This is Egypt. Expressing her own conservative views on same-sex practices from the perspective of a woman, Abdullah accused her sexual harassers at Al-Azhar of being sexually deviant, despite later experiencing the same identical accusations from Al-Azhar's scholars and the Egyptian public. So in a sense, she reproduced a certain very binary that was leveled on her body. That she pursued surgery to engage in same-sex practices. That was the accusation leveled against her. This is always about patriarchy, where phobia is just sexism dressed in drag. After all, queer communities, particularly gay men, always reproduce masculinity and patriarchy towards lesbians, towards bisexuals, towards trans, and so on and so forth. Explaining why she cross-dressed, Abdullah states, I told Al-Azhar that adopting the attire and mannerisms of a woman was part of the therapy designed to help me adapt to the life I would soon start as a woman. But they wouldn't listen. They didn't get it. I was suspended for 2 months and told I couldn't come back until I changed my deviant behavior. They said, we'd rather you be a homosexual in the dark than a woman in the light. The preference for a homosexual in the dark or for a woman in the light here is very critical, crucial, because it demonstrates that for Al-Azhar and general communities more predominantly, that recognizing Abdullah as a woman would destabilize masculinity, patriarchy, Egyptian, in this case, religious, cultural, gender, sexual norms. Other loves, this is what the Zahatistas call it. This is why they don't even use the term queer. People go back to their traditions. That's the dignity in decolonization. And what it demonstrates is a persisting post-colonial and patriarchal conflation in Egyptian discourses, psyches, religious, political, medical, media, judicial, and within mainstream society, as I noted, on the devil's distinction between gender, sex, and sexuality, between gender, identity, and expression, between biological sex and sexual orientation. This is the mess that liberal identity politics has wrought upon us. The head of Al-Azhar's medical family was not satisfied with just suspending Abdullah. He preferred to refer Abdullah to a disciplinary committee for posing as a woman in class, and demanded that Abdullah be medically examined. He preliminarily established a committee consisting of medical examiners, as well as the Fatwa Council, and the Mufti of the High Council of Islamic Affairs. The examination included anal probing, torture, to determine if she engaged in anal sex, given their insistence till the end that she was gay. You see, the first thing that usually queer people, but particularly gay men, get asked in Egypt, do you give or do you take? Do you fuck or do you get fucked? Because if you fuck, you're performing the role of the man, the patriarchal man. But if you get fucked, then you're debasing yourself in the role of a woman. Despite the fact that, like I said, in Islam, we're created from a single spirit that was split into equal, and the spectrum that creates. The examination also included an ultrasound torture technique of the prostate. When this had been done, they concluded in a medical report that Abdullah was not used. And she was 100% male, according to them, both outwardly and inwardly. The committee committed. Here we have a Muslim youth studying at the venerable Islamic Al-Azhar University who consults specialists of the devil's psychology and is told to follow their perverse inclination towards becoming a woman, and what comes is neither male nor woman, but something in between the two. Despite this opposition, January 29, 1988, Abdullah underwent sex change surgery, gender reassignment surgery, performed by a Christian plastic surgeon by the name of Izzat Asmallah. Prior to surgery, Abdullah was hospitalized for slashing her wrists as a suicide attempt. But following surgery, Abdullah described her mental and physical state as one of grief, of torture, as if a mountain was removed from my shoulder. Abdullah moreover said, the surgery was a matter of life and death. I've always had one foot in the world of men and the other in the world of women. So I stood in the middle of nowhere. When I played with boys, they would make fun of my girlish looks and behavior. I was always a beauty. Then I would go to the girls, but they rejected me because my name was Sayyid. Indicative of the tormenting burden that outcast queer Egyptians and queer Muslims in general suffered despite her relief. What remained was her familial and societal ostracization. She had no sense of belonging, which exacerbated her sense of alienation even from herself. According to Abdullah, whenever her siblings came home, they didn't talk to me. My neighbors would open the door as soon as I left our apartment to stare at me as if a strange being from a different universe had come. The first consequence, of course, of the surgery was the refusal of the dean of the Faculty of Medicine at Al-Azhar to permit Abdullah, now in the 4th year of her studies, to write her final exams. The second consequence was the dean's refusal to transfer her to the Faculty of Medicine insofar as women. After public news of the surgery broke out on April 4th, 1988, in Al-Ahram's newspaper, one of the most prominent newspapers in Egypt. An interview with Abdullah, followed by Egypt's muftis, they were immediately consulted by journalists for fatwas, all of them, based on Islamic debates on the differences between whether this is necessary or elective or selective surgery. The president of Al-Azhar's Fatwa Council and the Mufti of the High Council of Islamic Affairs soon published their fatwas in Al-Azhar's periodicals. The debate was whether gender could be a choice. The central issues became whether gender dysphoria was a medical condition and whether gender reassignment surgery was a choice made by people with the intention of intervening in what God created. Although a few details about Abdullah were known publicly up until this point, also scholars argue that surgery had not only mutilated Abdullah, God's creation, but had been done to satisfy Abdullah's journey to again engage in same-sex practices. Both religious officials said that the sex change, tahawul jinsi, was consistent with Islamic law if the medical experts assured that this was the only way by which the patient might obtain their true sex. But crucially, there was no consensus over what defined true sex, despite the superficial reliance on physical and anatomical external experience, the zahir, what we see on the surface of sex organs. Al-Azhar and Tabtawi never clarify really what they mean by a diagnosis of what they refer to as psychological hermaphroditism, because they established a binary, the natural and unnatural hermaphrodites, so they were using. And what clinical or the devil's medicine had originally contrived of ladies to define her body, her soul, her spirit, her mind. The two unaddressed questions provided the participants in the debate with the opportunity, like I said, to define natural and unnatural, what they refer to as hermaphroditism. To suit their own arguments, they redeveloped a binary schema that deployed antiquated methods to distinguish between the two. Wait, they said, until the hermaphrodite attains puberty, then look for the appearance of some feature of masculinity. But if none of these characteristics appear, facial hair, gets pregnant, gives milk, or if in the contrary they appear but in contradictory ways, they said, there is a fundamental ambiguity, and one is dealing with a true natural hermaphrodite. Of course, in adopting this approach, Al-Azhar was relying, like I said, on certain facets of modern medicine in its fiqh definitions, understanding of Islamic jurisprudence. But Tasirina Tuluni notes, in modern medicine, external organs are only one of the 5 factors that are considered when assigning biological sex. It includes the number and type of sex chromosomes, the gonads, hormones, and finally internal reproductive anatomy. Abdullah was not intersex, and this is a conundrum. In other words, she was not physically born with a reproductive or sexual anatomy that does not align with exclusive definitions of so-called man and woman. A common misconception regarding her case. She was transgender, seeking to fully become woman. That is her sense of her own person, her own gender, that did not correspond with her sex at birth. Rejecting, of course, this diagnosis, Al-Azhar established a second, and a third, and a fourth committee to re-examine Abdullah post-surgery, and insisted, based on the initial medical report that they shared with the Egyptian Doctors Syndicate, that she was psychologically disturbed, an artificial woman, they called her, and a khawa, an effeminate man willing to play a passive female role in sexual intercourse with other men. Abdullah, of course, contests that she's a khawa and states, I'm not shadda jinsiyya. I'm not sexually deviant, as they said about me. So again, she's reproducing a binary against now gay men. As they said about me, trying to distance herself from queer practices. And if I was like that, I wouldn't have conducted surgery and conducted my life as it is. Of course, following surgery, Abdullah never abandoned Islam. God bless her, may she rest in power. Nor her Muslim identity, despite her direly oppressive experience with Islam and conservative Muslims specifically, institutions like Al-Azhar, the Doctor Syndicate, and so on and so forth. To the contrary, Abdullah wore the hijab after surgery, until her suicide in 2013, and I was due to interview her a week prior to her suicide. Regarding her decision to wear the hijab, Abdullah states it was first because it is an obligation of fard upon me by Allah. Secondly, because I'm convinced of wearing it. Thirdly, I wear it to prove to society that I'm a Muslim, a genuine Muslim, a real Muslim. Despite these beliefs, she briefly worked as a nightclub dancer. Look at the defiance, yeah? Defiance. Using the stage name Rahma, mercy. In her interview with Al-Yawm Al-Sabi newspaper, Abdullah states, I worked as a belly dancer to prove to people that I'm a woman and to prove to Al-Azhar that I'm not a third gender, as they chimed. In becoming a professional belly dancer, Abdullah sought to arouse desire as a woman to confirm to all of society that she is, in fact, a woman. Of course, the Ministry of Culture, this is where we see the intervention of the state, denied her a dancing permit, and the moral police raided her shows, and the government accused her of evading compulsory military service. Here we see Abdullah's entanglement, of course, between the Egyptian state and Al-Azhar's religious and moralistic patriarchy. This is the madness that we individually are capable of engaging in our own becoming. This is liberation. Wait for it. On May 11th, 1988, Abdullah changed her name from Sayyid to Sali at the State Administration of Civic Affairs. On May 14, 1988, the Doctor Syndicate sent a letter to the Grand Mufti of the Egyptian Republic and the head of Al-Azhar, asking him to issue another fatwa. They claimed that Abdullah was an unnatural, again, hermaphrodite, and that the surgeon should be criminally charged under Article 240 of the Islamic Penal Code for having inflicted irreversible damage on Abdullah. The lead representative of the Doctor Syndicate was due to assign Dr. Hussam Eddin Khatib to investigate the case. The surgeon, Ashmallah, the anesthesiast, the psychologist, Gervis Labib, who I mentioned at the beginning, were all summoned before a medical board to determine whether the doctors collectively engaged in malpractice and violated the syndicate's regulations. The syndicate ruled that the 3 doctors had committed a professional mistake. Despite the clear mismatch between Abdullah's male body her female gender identity, she was not a hermaphrodite in the familiar sense of modern European terminologies, the devil's words. And the concept of gender dysphoria was not considered a viable diagnosis. Not surprisingly, of course, Al-Azhar's committee declared its support of the syndicate's position. The syndicate temporarily removed the surgeon and his membership's records, as well as the anesthetist, who was fined 300 Egyptian pounds for having participated in the surgery, a large amount in Egyptian society with 30 to 40%, now 50 to 60%. Live on less than $18 or 18 pounds, sorry. The Tawi's fatwa that was issued on June 8, 1988 concluded that if the surgeon testified that surgery was the sole cure for Abdullah, the procedure was authorized. The Tawi continued, this treatment cannot solely be from the whims of an individual's psychological desire to simply change sex, as that would threaten principles, values, ethics, and religion of Egyptian society. But the fatwa was not quite to the point, since it evaded the question of whether the diagnosis from a psychological standpoint was acceptable from the point of view of Islamic or Muslim. Consequently, opponents of the operation interpreted as supporting the cause because it condemned sex change operations performed simply at the wish of the patient. On the other hand, Sadi's party, eventually the public prosecutor, sought a supportive of their position because it placed the final decision with the medical doctor. 4 days later, on June 12, 1988, based on Tatawi's fatwa, Al-Azhar demanded that the Egyptian public state prosecutor level charges against Abdullah and the doctors involved yet again. Al-Azhar's lawyers used photographs of Abdullah in her belly dancing costume in their argument that Abdullah was liable for punishment and morally and religiously ill-suited to ever be readmitted into Al-Azhar in her last year of studies. The state prosecutor, of course, summoned again Abdullah, Ashmallah the surgeon, responding to the claim that Abdullah conspired with Ashmallah to cause herself a permanent deformity that stirred up social instability and public disorder. Upon yet another examination of Abdullah's anal cavities, that again affirmed the fact that she had not engaged in anal sex, recently or continuously. On September 25th, 1988, the Egyptian state issued finally a new ID number, 112516. A number. That is what our lives are worth. Identifying Abdullah as a woman. On November 11th, 1988, the doctor syndicate officially rejected the medical examiner Salah's finding and insisted on continuing to problematize Abdullah's surgery. On December 29th, 1988, the public prosecutor closed the case without bringing any charges, which over the course of decades had knocked heads with Al-Azhar's various Egyptian Muslim factions in defining its own version of Islam, because there's always a war between the state and Al-Azhar University over the very meanings of Islam. Surprise, surprise. Everybody's strong to what Islam means. Islam will be above, Islam will be below. Almost a year later, on October 1989, the prosecutor released the final report which contradicted Al-Azhar's views and exonerated Ashmallah and Abdullah of all charges that were on her. In November 1989, a month following the report's release, the Egyptian state granted Abdullah a new official birth certificate and legal identification as a woman. You see, the civil administrative court in Egypt, as well as predominantly Muslim societies that were colonized, operate till this day according to Napoleonic codes, upon which Egyptian civil laws are based. The decision to expel Abdullah and granted her permission to any university had also granted her permission to any Egyptian university to complete her final year, but she insisted on going back to Al-Azhar. But Al-Azhar continued to deny her admittance to the women's medical faculty to complete her last year of studies. Abdullah first married a year after surgery, but as she states, it wasn't based on love, only custom, or because I wanted to prove to myself and everyone that I am woman. My husband was an electrical engineer and I lived with him and his family and they knew my condition. They used to say, my husband, that I am the reason that his girl sisters aren't married. According to Abdullah, her second marriage was when she was 32 years old with a jeweler whose parents did not know. And I was with him for 3 years, till the fatwas, Al-Azhar's and Tatawi's, were issued against me stating that I'm neither man nor woman. Everything between my husband and I was natural, and I was treated as a complete woman. My husband left me because he and his family were under a lot of pressure from their families. Abdullah would later joke about her case, saying, I am dangerous as any terrorist. Of course, sex change surgery is legal, but none of that mattered to the world of the above. And Abdullah's comparison of herself to a dangerous terrorist for calling into question gender roles in Egypt, as well as the syndicate and Al-Azhar's verdict, that tied her gender transition to public immorality, despite the opinions of medical specialists on gender. We see the construction or reconstruction of sexual binaries through ethno-religious, patriotic, of course patriarchal too, religious frameworks that separate normative, national, and religious genders and sexualities from anti-national, anti-citizen, and immoral ones. Because any society constructs national and anti-national conceptualization of itself along race, along gender, along... Look at Nubians and Sudanese in Egyptian society. They are not considered to be Egyptian, except when they're being dangled as ways to solicit the white man's adventurous tourism in Egypt, insofar as Nubian queens and kings of Europe. And then we question where the anti-blackness comes from. The divergent medical views in the Egyptian medical profession on how to treat transgender people reflect the fear of unsettling, really, this is what it comes down to, the rigid grid of religious, cultural, gender, sexual norms. Accepting Abdullah as a woman would necessitate certain things, right? This is now the threat. This is why she's a terrorist. The determination of her societal rights, responsibilities, insofar as inheritance, dowry, adoption, marriage, divorce, like any other human being. Accepting transgender people would mean the disruption of all forms of heteropatriarchy in any society. If non-conforming gender sexual practices were acknowledged, it would literally open a public discussion about sexism or queerphobia, as well as ethical, political rights and responsibilities about an Islam of the below, and this is what they fear. So in contrast to the neoconservative perspective of Al-Azhar's Muslim psychiatrist, Abdullah, who argued that Abdullah's mental state was mainly caused by parents who spoiled and loved her too much, offering her little discipline, and even calling her by a girl's name instead of a boy's. We have medieval Islamic jurists who considered mental health crises and medical ethics to be related to social justice. This is decolonization. Such connections can be seen in the works of medieval Muslim scholars who addressed mental health, obsessive-compulsive disorders, grief, substance abuse, depression, anxiety, suicide, from spiritually meditative, aromatherapeutic, biopsychological, and biosocial, as well as musical perspectives. Decolonize your traditions of the devil. They did this with group therapies without stigmatizing patients and people, not patients. Re-establishing this perspective, though, would require the decolonial reintroduction of spirituality's relationship to healing. Neither Al-Azhar, of course, nor none of those mentioned above would care less about that. Pre-modern worlds and works that exist insofar as Al-Razi in the 9th century, Al-Farabi, somebody else in the 9th century, Ibn Sina, 10th century. But they were interested in exploring alternative Islamic understandings of gender, fluid understandings of sex, love, sexuality, as well as expressions of intimacies, vulnerabilities in hammam bathhouses. Examples of this literature, just so that our Muslims know who might be conservative in listening online. 12th century Farid al-Attar's Conference of the Birds. 15th century Mohamed ibn Muhammad al-Nafzawi, The Perfumed Garden. This is an Arabic sex manual. The writings of Abbasid scholar al-Jahiz from the 8th century on the ways of young men and women. Al-Katib's 10th century Encyclopedia of Pleasure. The Seljuk Empire's Assemblies of Hariri, about same-sex attractions. The 13th century polymath Nasruddin Tusi, The Sultan's Sex Potions, that was a book on sexual stimulants and erotic sex positions. Let alone the poetry of al-Rumi. But Muslims don't want to go to their traditions and understand the reason for the shameful taboo is infiltrating her psyche and the work of the devil. Of course, Tantawi and Al-Azhar and everybody in society ignored Abdullah's religiosity and made negative assumptions about her intent to pursue same-sex practices. Yet the case was not about sexuality, but rather, again, as I insist, upon gender. By attributing to Abdullah or Abdullah's decision to undergo gender reassignment surgery, to the corrupt devil's influence and the desire to change, to engage in same-sex practices, despite the fact that she was deeply religious, wore the hijab, was faithful to Islam, demonstrated her sincere commitment to her faith, Tantawi dismissed with the Quranic verse that says, "O you who believe, shun much conjecture. Indeed, such conjecture is sin. And do not spy upon one another, nor backbite one another. Would any of you desire to eat the dead flesh of their siblings? The devil is here, my siblings. There are earth eaters all around us." Tantawi, of course, was more preserved with guarding the gendered and sexual contours of cis-heteronormativity. And supposedly minimizing balbala, which is scandalous publicity, which in fact he created. Namima, which is forbidden in Islam, which is still there in gossip. But that is what he accepted. Tantawi decried there was nothing transsexual or transgender about the case, which was simply a question of sodomistic inclinations. Of course, there are no anti-debauchery laws in Egypt, by the way, nor in any of our post-colonial societies. They don't exist. The debauchery laws, the anti-debauchery laws that exist, as a matter of fact, or anti-sodomy laws, sorry to correct myself, there aren't in our society. There are anti-debauchery laws, and do you know who they were meant to target in our societies? Again, because we all operate vis-a-vis the French Penal Code. Women that engage in sex tourism to cater what? To the devil's desire. To the devil's tourism. But this is where, again, women become central and everything is an extension. That's why the women threat and transgender people too. Khunatha, of course, and this is the traditional Arabic Muslim lexicon, is not a new topic, but was rather a subject medieval jurists discussed. However, in this case, like I said, unlike medieval jurists, their anxiety regarding Abdullah, an ungendered body, led them to attribute a sex to a body which does not possess only one sex, simply for the sake of preserving a binary system. Abdullah had to fit into one of the categories. But this is the demarcation. Of course, they ignore that transgender people existed during the Prophet's life, of course. And they were known as mukhanathin and even existed, surprise, surprise, in his own household. Gender segregation is a crucial part of conservative Muslims, and the degree to which it is practiced is often evoked to diagnose the extent to which Muslims are morally chaste, loyally guarding Islam's principles. Conservative Muslims, of course, represented a process through which men had, or in the case of Abdullah, for conservative Muslims, Abdullah, like other same-sex and trans men and women, represented a process through which men had become effeminate to the conservatives. That's what had been interpreted. And women masculine due to the mixing ikhtilaf of the sexes in schools, in work, in society at large, not to mention the devil's indulgence in illicit sex. Well, point of surprise, in the holiest places for Muslims in Mecca, the genders intermix and intermingle all the time without. So how does that work? And speaking to the devil, what about those Israeli IOF soldiers, their pedestry, the hypersexualization of Muslim women, their flaunting of their lingerie and their underwear, the sickness, the duress, the undress? I'll never forget, being on the subway on 9/11, yeah? And I'm not going to get into Al Parade and Guantanamo and sexual torture. But I'll never forget on 9/11 being in the subway in New York City. And on the subway there was this huge poster. Pamela Geller sponsored all the right wingers, including liberals like Mr. Bill Maher, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, and all of them. This isn't just conservatives. And a big poster that had Osama bin Laden with the Empire State Building penetrating his asshole, his anus, with the words what? Empire Strikes Back. This is shame. This is what we internalize with reactionary politics that leads us to become more conservative with regards to our readings of our own traditions and missing out on an Islam of the below. If the point, of course, is to delimit ikhtilat or mixing, to prevent fornication or zina, as Al-Azhar and conservative Muslim state, then the irony is, in Egyptian law, zina is not normally punished. Though being one of the 5 principal hudud mentioned in the Qur'an, but to be accused of adultery or zina, let me show you the mercy of this Islam and how privacy is guarded. To be accused of adultery in Islam, you have to have 4 witnesses witnessing you in the act. That literally means that I would get up from my lover's bed, naked, open the door, 4 witnesses to come in, and for me to return to bed. Privacy, khususiyat. This matters, and we no longer live in an age where privacy exists. We live in an age where everybody, including our most intimate recesses and expressions, our own feelings, our bodily encounters have to be publicized, aired, public. We have a camera on every cell phone. Given that Abdullah could be perceived as not being fully man or fully woman, some scholars argue that she could be an unik. Look, they're trying to find excuses. In medieval Islamic societies, unics, or what was referred to in English, what is referred to now as unics, were one group entitled to enter both women and men's spheres and were in charge of the harem. However, accepting Abdullah as a unik would create another conundrum, of course, for Al-Azhar, but they could care less about that. Because that means that she would be entitled to enter both the men and the women's section, insofar as to complete her medical degrees. And of course, they rejected it. Abdullah ended up working as an ethics teacher because, according to her, I wanted to compensate my love for children by working with them because I cannot have children because surgery did not construct a rahim, a uterus. And I remained like that. I worked as a teacher until I was confronted with slander at school, so I was forced to resign. She proceeded to work in the Egyptian Initiative for Personal Rights that still exists, specifically the Word Center, because, in her words, I wanted to help cases. On September 9th, 10th, 2010, the newspapers Alif and Al-Naba reported that Abdullah lodged a complaint against Al-Azhar in the African Union, seeking to return to Al-Azhar's medical faculty and to become a doctor. Of course, the African Union has no jurisdiction in Egypt nor influence upon Al-Azhar, but why is that supposed to surprise us when the ICC and ICJ, all these world of the above institutions, have no relevance whatsoever? The devil's world is exposed, bare naked. That is what October 7th is. By then, Abdullah was 48 years old, and there are no records of what transpired, of course, between the African Union hearings that were due to be held November 2010. Her lonely struggle until the end was driven by the sole dream of returning to Al-Azhar to complete her 5th and last year of medicine before, as I noted, her suicide 1 week in 2013. Before I was due to interview her, I was inspired by her from a relatively young age, and I came to know her story at the age of 51. And this is right after, of course, the so-called Arab Spring. In her last interview in 2010, Abdullah states, "Not for a moment do I feel any regret for conducting surgery. On the contrary, I thank Allah every moment for this decision because Allah," but this is now rephrasing, it becomes the problem, "inflicted me with a disease and then cured me. Look at the internalized hurt." Of course, the Ramadan show was produced after Abdullah's life, titled Sarkhat Untha, the scream of a woman. Though Abdullah states they certainly relied on my case, but changed and distorted a lot of truth. They could concur again the same. Abdullah's body was a symbol of social disorder, injustice, Western decadence, the devil's decadence. But it demonstrates the power, the political power of ar, of shame, and the necessity for dignity, the dignidad. This rejection of Abdullah provided a false sense of cultural, religious, nationalist triumph and security over amoral or an amoral, devilish European system that has demonized and dominated Arab and Muslim cultures and peoples and bodies and souls and minds for generations. This doesn't originate necessarily in even conservative interpretations of Islam. But in the West, the transformation of sexuality into an identity politique centered on LGBTIQ, rights-based discourses, inheritance, marriage, premised on individualist Protestant ethics, Western crusading politics, that remains the problem. But this is the psychoaffective violence in Qur'an's language and words. This is what shame inflicts. And of course, she was presented as a symptom of the evils of Egyptian society. There's no doubt, like I said, of the existence of transgender Muslims and non-Muslims during the Prophet's life. As I mentioned, when existed, we have historical figures as Tawus the singer, known as the Little Peacock, whose real name was Isa ibn Abdullah. And there's considerable evidence for the existence of a form of publicly recognized effeminacy amongst males in pre-Islamic and early Islamic Arab society. Unlike other men, these effeminates were permitted to freely associate with women under the assumption that they had no sexual interest in them, and actually they often brokered marriages and less legitimately acted as go-betweens. Of course, I was paying attention when I was writing about this case because Tantawi was also looking very much to Ayatollah Khomeini in 1980 after the Iranian uprisings, the Islamic, or what is referred to as the Islamic Revolution. And of course, Iran is one of the largest producers of transgender surgery, or gender reassignment surgeries, about 15 to 20,000 per year. But of course, this presents another problem, right, which is the institutionalization of transgender people. But what I found unique in Khomeini, unlike in the context of Al-Azhar, that when Mukhalla, actually Maryam Khatoon Bukhara, after he came to know her as a transgender woman, he didn't shun her, and he actually accused those who weren't. He didn't blame Bukhara's struggle on ostracization, on societal oppression. And yes, his policy led to tolerance, not the acceptance of trans people, because of the degree of, again, psychological filtration and jurisprudential demarking that is aimed at, again, erasing gays, lesbians, queer people entirely. The Prophet never sanctioned trans punishment nor banishment, nor did he insist, as Tantawi, that they often abandon their ways. Rather, only in one instance, the Prophet forbade them from entering Salama, one of his wife's chambers, as an exceptional means of eliminating the possibility of slander. Slander against who? One of his revered wives, Aisha, who is being accused of adultery. Context. This is a betrayal, my siblings, of the legacy, the mirath, bequeathed to us as Muslims. Mirath, like Sufi scholars as Ibn Arabi, who have argued that the ruh, the human spirit, exudes the divine feminine, portrayed in God, and hence that we must all embrace femininity as a means to subdue an-nafs al-ammara that I mentioned yesterday, our baser instincts, which are depicted as masculine, i.e. the devil. Reality is, in an examination of Surah Al-Anbiya, the chapter of the prophets, one finds multiple positional feminine and masculine exemplary lives and practices in the prophets from Adam to Yusuf to Ibrahim to Mohamed to Isa and so on and so forth. There is no singular form of masculinity or femininity. Of course, they refer to this as the age of Salih. Now, from the individual to the collective, and hopefully I'll be able to maybe complete what I have to share. To the ethics of disagreement, what is referred to as al-ikhtilaf or conflict resolution. Ikhtilaf is an Arabic term that denotes taking a different position or course from that of another person, either in opinion, utterance, or action. Ikhtilaf is from the word khilaf, of the same root. Khilaf is used synonymously with ikhtilaf, which means difference, disagreement, or even conflict, broader in meaning and implication of the concept of direct opposition, because two opposites are necessarily different from each other. Whereas to things, to ideas, to persons that differ are not necessarily opposed to or necessarily in conflict with one another. And we lack in ethics of disagreement. This is why we tear each other apart, as I mentioned in lecture number 1. But the ikhtilaf is necessary because even the closest friends, lovers, accomplices, allies, will inevitably disagree out of respect for that relationship and for that relationship's nourishment, maturing, and growth. The prerogative, of course, is that if differences are confined to the proper limits and people are trained to observe the proper ethics and norms of expressing and managing differences, after all, this is about, like I said, context, then several positive advantages could emerge as a result. Dissension is natural, as long as it is not for the sake of dissension or not for the sake, pardon, mere contrarian dissent. There's nothing more beautiful than two people sitting on the side and enjoying each other's company, in silence or in disagreement. There's growth, there's maturity. There are no two people that are. In the Ethics of Disagreement in Islam in 1993, published, Taha al-Jabr al-Alwani, whose work I built on, classifies the spectrum of disagreements into four. The first disagreement is concerned with narrow divisions and dogmatic refusal to broaden perspectives due to essentialist practice of purist ideological, political, or politics between two parties. You're a Marxist, I'm an anarchist. No discussion between us. People have different values. That it's based on narrow visions, dogmatism. One or both parties are engaging in contrarian disagreements without being able to even argue or produce textual evidence or lived experience relative to their opinions. In this instance, personal views relating, for example, insofar as Islam premised on reactionary ignorance, are conflated with possessed discursive knowledge. An anarchist says to me, oh, it's impossible to be a Muslim anarchist. Are you crazy? Islam is queer-phobic, is sexist, is forget it. Basura, you're trash. You don't belong to this group. The second type of disagreement effervesces because parties have given a particular ethical political issue more anti-intersectional or importance, let us put it simply, to the exclusion of any other aspect, which then becomes the basis for judging, disdaining, or accepting the other's views. In this occasion, distinct priorities nurture different goals, as strategic objectives are conflated with tactic, or imminent tactical choices. People need to learn the difference between strategy and tactic. Now we need to all be reading, as my sister Kiki and I have been saying, especially this battle, the difference between strategy and tactic. We'll read the art of war censored. There's a reason that they can. Only generals have access to that. Heaven forbid that soldiers actually knew what was contained within it. But the lack of distinction between strategy and tactic results in disagreements being inflated and blown out of proportion, furthering to internal strife. An example is the, again, oversimplistic anarchistic critiques of queerphobia and sexism that exist in predominantly Muslim societies without an understanding of the homophilic nature that exists within our societies. When men walk around, we hold each other's hands. Sometimes we'll even kiss in the nose or get our noses to touch and do this sound as if we're kissing. That's lesser now, of course, because of the devil's work. Terrorists everywhere. The third type arises as a consequence of the stubborn adherence of parties to their own opinions, their positions, irrespective of their ability to defend their position. In this instance, parties are strictly motivated by the will to prevail. They simply have an egomaniacal desire to appear superior. My argument is more relevant or important than you. Oh, I'll call myself a whatever, American at the expense of indigenous people. I don't need to care about that. America that feeds intersettler colonialism. I don't need to care about that. The purpose is to force the other to accept an opinion or to hold it against them by way of disputation or Hegelian dialectics or what is known as jadal, because the Prophet was told, وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. Engage with what is better. Be wise in your engagements, even in your disagreements. The intent behind these arguments is simply, in this case, to gain an upper hand. I'm right, you're wrong. The argument is a consequence of a dereliction to combating and, of course, warding off the ego, the devil, the microfascism, a refusal to acknowledge the battle within the greater jihad of the self, or against the nafs that exists. And a refusal to acknowledge the other is equal, as a khalif or a khulafa, as I was saying. The fourth type of disagreement arises in contexts in which parties are sincerely motivated by the pursuit of knowledge and truth in their disagreements. In this sense, neither strict ignorance or selfishness act as primary interests or intents or motivations behind the dissent. It comes down to personal inclinations, preferences, that are really tainting the full breadth and depth of an argument, such that partial knowledge is mixed in with conjecture, leading to different conclusions. This is a consequence, of course, in so many different parts, at least within the neoliberal academy, the compartmentalization of knowledge systems, and the inception of the category of the expert, Dr. Mohamed the expert. Disagreement arises because of how neoliberal academic knowledge systems constitute a racial, classist, gender-based privilege space that can nurture partial or a multiplicity of incomplete truth statements. because of how this privileged knowledge is also contingent, for instance, on whether scholars and activists choose to engage in even ethnographic research, historical archival research, or even interdisciplinary approaches. Neoliberal academics are premised on prejudicial and conventional Eurocentric fields of studies that masquerade as universal discourses. They're segregated discourses, or ontologically, epistemologically ill-suited, narrow, incongruent with the more communitarian, sophisticated, desegregated, pre-modern knowledge systems that animate indigenous, black, and people of color ways of life. Our old traditions, stories, our analysis, how we walk with them. Our narratives that are often too cast by your America as myths, superstitions, non-scientific, the way that we write, the way that we speak. The Eurocentric dismissal of the former occurs despite the widely held notion that people of color's knowledge systems are multiple, collaborative, cumulative, living memories that are intensely embedded in cosmological, cultural, spiritual, land-based techniques, skills, value systems, and ways of knowing. In the case, of course, of the fourth disagreement or type of disagreement, that differences should not hinder the call to remove the underlying causes of the rift. It demands, though, a decolonial commitment that we expand our knowledge systems from interdisciplinary perspective. Transcending differences means delineating narrow visions, feelings of exclusivity, slander, and bad faith that furthers through the absence of trust or theta. All that undermine supposed solidarity, which is our verb, as well as the social fabric and the possibility of actually found a world of the good, a world where all worlds fit. Ignoring what is in the communal welfare of everybody feeding into, if you will, the selfish, egomaniacal motivations or however, will only lead to an enlargement of this tendency of conflict that deeply penetrates into each and every single one of our psyches. Takes hold of our minds, our attitudes, our feelings, where we even lose sight of the overall view of things, of strategy, of liberation. And we ignore the common lofty goals and objective that solidarity and friendship calls for. This is why the greater jihad. It is related that Wasl ibn Ata was with a group of Muslims, and they came upon some people whom they recognized as the Khawarij, the original anarchists. Wasl's company was in a critical situation and faced possible annihilation at the hands of the Khawarij, who were of the opinion that Muslims who did not share their views should be killed. Wasl told his group that he will deal with the situation. The Khawarij came up to him and asked threateningly, "Who are you and who are your companions?" Wasl replied, "They are mushrikeen, infidels, seeking protection so that they may listen to the word of God and know their laws. We grant you protection," said the Khawarij. And Wasl asked them to teach him. This, then, they proceeded to do according to their own positions. At the end, Wasl said, "I and those who are with me accept what you have taught us." Thereupon the Khawarij said, "Go in company with one another, for you are brothers and sisters in faith. This is not for you to say," Wasl responded, as he recited the following verse of the Qur'an. "And any of you of the mushrikeen, and if any of you of the mushrikeen, even those who are infidels, seeks your protection, grant them protection, so that they might hear the word of God, the truth of the land, the truth of justice, the world of the good, and therefore convey to them a place where they can feel secure." So we need to abstain from reactionary politics. We need to move forward little by little so that we can see eye to eye on the nature of our disagreements. The truth behind the disagreement is not the threats that arrive with it, but rather the simultaneous room for self-reflection involved in the moment it emerges and following it as an event that demands, that warrants, that is worthy of deep contemplation. Particularly if the disagreement is of tactical or doesn't hinder strategic importance to the relationship. Disagreements are rooted in discoverable centers. To reach them entails that the disagreeing parties we must have good faith, we must be well-intentioned. But this demands that we are mature, emotionally, intellectually, that we communicate the parameters of our disagreement in a healthy, transparent way, that we address ourselves with words, with finesse and silence, so as to make the disagreement visible, pivot before our eyes. We need to find the wiggle room. Listening is an art. Listening is different from here. Negotiations in our disagreements can last so long that they can mean the beginning of war or peace, depending on the nature and the value of disagreements too, as well as the willingness and timeliness of negotiations. This process may at times also mean that the tactical disagreement must be put aside, while the strategic friendship and communal solidarity is maintained. We have a larger objective, the forest through the trees. Ultimately, it requires our consent. No one else besides the parties that are involved in a disagreement have really the right to participate or to partake in mediating a disagreement without the parties' consent, especially in their absence. And yes, though at times it is necessary to put disagreements aside, there is a danger of leaving disagreements for too long, indefinitely, unresolved. Because over time, reconstructed gaslighting narratives can begin to encircle the original root and the cause of the rift. The rift can act as a source of bold relief for both parties and undo the will in striving to bridge the differences. The risk here is that as time passes, the risk compounds and eventually leads to the relationship's decay if not its outright withering. But here I'm going to offer a fourth type of disagreements. Sometimes any two parties need to agree to disagree so that the relationship undergoes a break. It is crucial to note that the logic of agreeing to disagree is distinct, though, from types of disagreements as a means to find a way. At times, it is most reasonable for both parties to give up, to move on, or at the very least to strive to stay out of each other's way, especially if they want and are after the same strategic goals or objectives insofar as resistance to fellow liberation. Hopefully that time allows time to reflect, to grow, for people to alter their views, to change, to see new perspectives, for a future or a new futurity to arrive. An example of this, I had the honor, while with our siblings in La Condana jungle, I'm going to draw on the case of indigenous Muslims in Chiapas, some of whom were ex-Zapatistas who split from the Murabitin world movement founded by a Scottish convert by the name of Abdullah or Sufi. They were also Jewish prior to their conversion to Islam. As new converts, the former were undergoing a process of reconciling their spiritual identity with their social justice commitments, etc., but also contending with their differences with non-Muslims. In my time with Mujahid, an indigenous Muslim, he spoke about how despite differences between Muslim and non-Muslim Zapatistas, both parties were committed to the exchange of delegates between them in an effort to keep the channels of dialogue always open. Mujahid. We would chat to see what there is. We would share what we are as Muslims. If they aren't, we would give them the knowledge we have. If they could use it, they use it. If it doesn't serve them, it doesn't. They then can be aware of the point of view that we. For example, the brother here, Compañero Habib, was a Zapatista. He was fighting. But there are things that we see in the inside. It is different to look at it from the outside than living inside there. I tell you that it hurts my heart to see my indigenous brothers and sisters. Not just in San Cristobal, but in the jungle, all over the world. I was there with them in the jungle. I saw and see how they are suffering. There's a lot of ignorance in indigenous communities about Islam. For Mujahid, of course, the ultimate priority of the Muslim community is to support indigenous people, where they are Zapatistas or not, and I'm sure vice versa. Mujahid notes, principally, it's the base, the world of the below. Me, personally, I've chatted with the Zapatistas, but principally, it's about the base. It is about going out and talking with the people here, not on social media, here on the land, not just in the jungle, and sharing what we know. The real struggle is on the road. For the kids, the women, there are a lot of people. There's a lot of suffering. People walk 6 or 7 hours a day with their kids, with their 6 families. We have to give the message. What is the struggle they are hearing? What is their struggle? What is our struggle? Is it the best correct struggle in this moment in time? Should they be going out in front of their family for a struggle? We see people struggling. Should they be left abandoned? That is the sad part of teaching about what struggle is. But this is the emphasis, to reiterate the value of face-to-face, world of the below grassroots encounters. Never foreclosed. Always open opportunities. The necessity for dialogue between allies, friends, lovers, for relationships to flourish. Now let me propose that this allows and sheds room for the idea of what I refer to as a mediator. But before that, segue for a second. The Qur'an. Mind. If two parties amongst the believers fall into quarrel, make ye peace between them. But if one of them transgresses beyond bounds against the other, then fight ye all against the one that transgresses until they comply with the commanded ethical political values of Allah. But if they comply, then make peace between them with justice and be fair. Be fair. Even in war, be fair. For Allah loves those who are fair and just. All believers are but a single ummah, a single brotherhood, sisterhood. So make peace and reconciliation between your two contending parties, and fear Allah that ye may receive mercy. Now to the concept of mediator. The concept of mediator in my world is very radically different than the idea of an arbiter when two people are disagreeing. An arbiter I see as an imposer of a settlement between two parties. That's the devil's work, undergoing a contestation. Mediators, in my mind, are individuals who are chosen because they can be trusted and have been proven themselves to disagreeing parties. Their anti-authoritarian function is to facilitate healing, peace, to bring together parties, a discussion of critical points over which there is a dispute. A mediator assists contesting parties to reach some kind of an agreement without imposing the powers of an arbiter. Mediators can, but not necessarily, belong to a multiplicity of identity formations. Perhaps a Muslim anarchist can help heal the rift between Muslims and anarchists. Perhaps Afro-Indigenous people could help heal the rift between Indigenous and Black students. And particularly mediators become very important because they have access to a conglomeration of mother tongues, of discourses, of communities, of places of belonging, of regimes of belief. They're capable of clarifying misconceptions. No, it doesn't have to be Black self-determination at the expense of Indigenous liberation and remediation of land, nor the other way around. The white man fooled us both. What this means is a new way of talking, though, a new way of speaking, of communicating. Not so much for a disagreement to be a matter of winning arguments, but rather a way of opening things up. Setting up our facts, our truths, not of a situation, but of a problem. Making visible things that would otherwise be hidden, invisible. Mediators, of course, need to exist parallel to supplementary channels like collective commitments to self-education by members of seemingly opposed communities. It is not merely based on the fact that, oh, we have vague friendly contacts with one another. Oh, we're both at the same protest. This is the problem with mobilization. How many went out during the anti-war protests that were out in Afghanistan for the millions? And I'm grateful for leftists that showed up. But certainly there were more leftists than there were Muslims. Shame on us. But how many leftists stepped into mosques, got to know Muslims? How many? So this involves fertile cultivation of a sense of infinite responsibility and a deep-seated investment within different communities to get to know one another. This is what the Qur'an says to create different tribes and nations so that you may get to know. And we need to immerse each other in each other's worlds. We need an ethics of disagreement and mediation that moves beyond punitive carceral punishments. They're also related to decolonial and abolitionist land and community-based frameworks of transformative justice, forgiveness, repentance, which within themselves should not be normative or normalized. The characteristic of embodying forgiveness and repentance is vital if the goal of both accountability and transformative justice beyond the nation state is to be achieved. All nation states reduce and produce the devil's world. All nation states and the devil produce violence. Of course, I had the honor of spending time with my sibling Philippe Tosson during the annual Zapatista Encuentro in Chiapas, and this was in 2011. Memory 2011. Philippe Tosson was a former Vicar General of the Diocese of San Cristobal under Bishop Ruiz, and he played a critical role in orchestrating the San Andreas peace accords, between the Mexican government and the Zapatistas in 1994.
Describing conflict resolution to Islam states in some places being an active Catholic implies entering into opposition and mediating with neighbors and even one's own family when differences arise. Having left the church, Toussaint helped found the Commission of Assistance towards Community Unity and Reconciliation of Curico. Curico works, of course, without any religious or political party affiliation. They belong to the worlds of the below. On resolving community conflicts and impelling these processes. Toussaint shared with me that Curico focuses on different spiritualities, traditions working with one another. It is not a hierarchical group, it is a base group, the world of the below. What I'm doing, he says, what I'm doing now is working with indigenous communities to support the people to resolve the political and economic conflicts in a pacifist path. Doing mediation work between different groups to have good dialogue, negotiation, giving advisory to people in an area to watch and to be witness to different processes, what they refer to as positive conflict resolution. We must always ask, is the disagreement that we're having truly worth the trauma that we're about to further inflict upon one another? Political friendships are always entangled in the tenuous tension of determining whether an individual or group, say A, who say they believe XY, truly believes and practices XY in a way that the individual or group B will accept as such. If A and B, however, do not find themselves to be similar in enough ways that each of them requires that after their initial meeting and unpacking of the kids' bags or the kit bags, they may as well decide to go their separate ways. But an ethics of disagreement is not enough. We need a political friendship and hospitality. To the Jew, the Algerian Jew, Jacques Derrida, though friendships are inherently political, they cannot be solely based on politics. Rather, they must involve a spiritual, a personal, a relational affinity. Friendships must be unconditionally open to the possibility that misconceptions regarding the other will be proven wrong. For this potential discovery to exist, it must be grounded in a work of hospitality. How do we offer hospitality to one another? That means humility. That means welcoming gestures. It also means, again, a dedicated commitment to learn different cultural and spiritual ways of greeting, of saying salam, of speaking, of listening, of inviting the other to the home, coupled with a desire to grow. Unconditional hospitality's purpose is to enable the unraveling of meanings in the name of a higher justice, as opposed to predetermined binding to communities. Oh, just because I'm an anarchist, then I'm just going to stick with those. Because they share the same identity and name. Fuck the identity, fuck the name. So it requires fidelity to the hopeful promise that if commitments do not immediately align, that these commitments might shift over time. We align along capitalist, utilitarian commitments, okay. I'm queer-phobic, help me, work with me. But that means I need to be dedicated in investment in that project to understand queerness, to undo my own queer phobia. That means caring. That means self-knowing. Caring for the self, and my potential to become, to grow. Derrida writes of the Punumba tribal ceremonies in which it was customary for women to evoke laughter, tears, and smile, a compassionate sign of welcoming the visitor. Derrida notes when the Punumba women receive visitors, they cry as a sign of love, with both hands over their hearts. Weeping, you're welcome to the visitor. Where are you, my lover, that I waited for my entire life? A stranger, a wayfarer. How can I offer you protection, safety, sanction? So that means exploring how we can greet one another, open doors to share laughter, tears, our hopes, foods. After all, how can we disassociate a culture of hospitality from a culture of laughter, a culture of a smile, during which one welcomes without smiling at the other, without giving the sign of joy or pleasure, without smiling at the other, as at the welcome of a promise. To smile is to reach proximities. It's to draw the other closer or near, to welcome them, to reach the open air that divides us, the distance. The Qur'an states, lo, Allah does not love, does not appreciate those who are proud and boastful. Do not walk with your head to the sky as if you're an arrogant person, nor do you bow down just avoid eye contact, dignity. In Islam, a smile is an inaudible sequence, a glad tiding, a sadaqah, an act of charity. We're actually rewarded when we smile towards others. Look at the great mercy that Allah loves. The Qur'an actually says, وَإِذَا حُيِّيتُم بِتَحِيَّةٍ فَحَيُّوا بِأَحْسَنَ مِنْهَا أَوْ رُدُّوهَا فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ حَسِيبًا. And if you are greeted with a greeting of peace, return that greeting with a greater greeting of peace, or even the same peace, for God is upon everything a witness. To smile is to say, is really, to smile is to disarm the other with an upturned arc, as opposed to a frown. To smile is to say, come in, even if the smile is interior and discreet, and even if it is mixed with tears, with cries of joy. There is madness, you see, in meeting with you. Given that the question of hospitality is also a question of waiting, of the time of waiting, and of waiting beyond time. How much have I longed to meet all of you, and I hope you will the same. Smile is beyond a day. It resembles a pregnancy, a promise, as much as a threat, because of how much it is filled with anxiety, joy. It is like the announcement of childbirth. And hospitality shouldn't start with interrogative questions like, what is your name? The name of the other should always be surrendered, willfully given, against any deadline imposed, on its own conditions, on its own terms. Even if one were to ask for a name, the asking is to be tendered, humbly, as if to say, what should I call you? I will call you. I want to call you by your name. Let me also state that though the thought of two parties embellishing in a speech as they get to know one another is useful, even necessary, the tip to that accompanies speaking can be carried by one party or the other to the brink of worshipping one's own voice. Oh, I want to share everything, and engaging in a verbal diarrhea, which can be very nauseating. Of course, the moment that two people meet is a moment of divine intervention. It's a moment of mourning. I don't believe in coincidence. The moment that you met me and vice versa, a sentence, a look, a dress, anything that I might have said might have turned you off. But at some point or another, as I said before, it means that we bear responsibility for each other's names, because at one point or another, I or the other will die, and one will have to bear responsibility for the other's name. It is narrated that Abdullah ibn Umar al-As is reported to have said, verily a person asked the Prophet, peace be upon him, who amongst the Muslims was better? The Prophet ﷺ responded, from those whose hands and tongues, Muslims and non-Muslims, are safe. They have one tongue, we have 2 ears. The wisdom creation. Let's listen more than we speak. Instead of feeling obligated or being compelled to talk, we should become silent observers of each other and keep language scarce. Sometimes that is very useful. This is not to say that mixing with one another's mother's tongues is not of vital importance. It's to say that silence can free each other. Silence is not necessarily repressive. It can be, of course. But it can also be liberating. Silence can mean enough comfort for a disenfranchised voice to strut petulantly, to speak. Silence means not policing the other, because it carries with it liberatory potentials, to cathartically free what is unsaid, what is untranslatable, what can never be translated, can never be representative. Because of the devil's violence, because of the devil's wounds that the other has internalized. The Jewish Benedict Spinoza writes, I should say that human affairs would be much more happily conducted if it were equally in the power of men to be silent than to speak. There is nothing which men have less power over than their own tongues. To command the tongue is to have it dictate on its own terms and voice what it desires to say and how it sees fit to express what it states in the moment it wishes to express. The point is to feel bereft by what the other says, as if we're waiting an aria in a concerto, so that the worlds that accompany that world and words and the plethora of meanings are listened to. Language, as we know, is all charged with power relations and violences, which especially people of color did. But the object of language, truly, honestly, genuine, is not communication. It's to charge cartographies, to charge new geographies of meaning. We need to be attended to, or we need to attend to slogans, to watchwords. Really listen to them. Literally words of order. The dominant, the orthodox ways of classifying, organizing, and explaining the world that we have internalized, and what breaks through all of that. The assemblages of enunciation, the signs and signs of truth. What a relief to have nothing to say, the right to say nothing as opposed to the plague of pointless statements. Free, free Palestine. Because only then is there a chance of framing the rare and even rarer thing that actually might be worth saying. And when we meet, as I noted, I'd like to just, as I believe, as I try, we shouldn't quibble straight away, but rather we need to think, reflect, self-examine ourselves, and the preconceived notions that we bring to the space, the context. And of course, when one party speaks, the other should listen actively, and not just hear. Because, as I noted before, hearing involves a reactionary dismissal of what's already being said, by way of calculating in advance a response to what is said instead of bearing witness, being shuhada, to the tonality, the form, the grammar, the body language, the vocabulary alive in another's mother's tongue. We need to hold on to what the other says, as opposed to immediately converting it towards back right at them. Of course, we need to assume that the party listening must assume that the one speaking is telling the truth, whatever the consequences may be. For yes, though one may speak and is granted even some right to lie for the best reasons in the world, somebody is underneath persecution. One must always realize that when one does so, one also threatens the social bond itself, the universal possibility of the social contract, the sociality in general. It would be better off in that instance that the party that is about to lie, to have itself lie, to stay, instead of lying, to stay silent, or to say, I cannot divulge. I will not talk about that yet, perhaps even maybe never. As Derrida writes, when I'm speaking to you, I promise you the truth. It's also, of course, necessary to understand when to stop talking. Like I noted, though unconditional hospitality means appreciating waiting for the other, it is also no longer able to wait. It's already waiting to send an invitation, not only to the home, but rather to a shared life, a world of the below, where all worlds fit. That will be fraught, of course, with anxieties and a desire. We all have our insecurities and our fears, and we all want to be invited and we all want to belong. But in the absence of community, we all become wolves. Hospitality must wait, it must extend itself towards the other. The gifts, the sights, the shelter, the cover must be ready not to wait, but to welcome, to host, to shelter, to give shelter and to cover. It must prepare itself and adorn itself for the coming of the other, beautify itself for the other. It must even develop itself into a culture of hospitality, multiply the signs of anticipation, construct, and institute what one calls structures of welcoming apparatus. To invite the other, to honor the other as a guest is important in Islam. In the Sunnah, Abu Shuraib al-Abdawi reported, my eyes listened and my eyes saw when the Prophet, peace be upon him, spoke and said, whoever believes in Allah and the hereafter should show respect to the guest, even with utmost kindness and courtesy. They said, O Messenger of Allah, what is this utmost kindness and courtesy? He replied, at least shelter and safety for a day and a night. And in other narrations, 3 days. And what is beyond that is a sadaqah, is a gift, is a blessing for the party offering hospitality. Whoever believes in Allah and the hereafter should say something good or remain quiet. To invite is to spread one's garment as a cushion in honor of the guest who becomes a master. Unconditional hospitality, as I noted, is at the heart of Islam. The heart of Islamic principles of Derrida writes, Islam deduced the principal right of hospitality, ikram al-dayf, respect of the human person sent by God, for the guest is a guest from God. In Islam, we have the word jiwar, a verb of action in Arabic, or the phrase husn al-jiwar, being neighborly to the other who is now beside oneself. Al-dakhil is the interior, the intimate for the stranger, the passerby, the traveler to come in. The dayf, the guest, is a guest from God, a visitor. We Muslims offer ourselves as a pledge, as voluntary prisoners, in a kind of captivity and a kind of spiritual residency and sanctuary. As hostages, we offer ourselves. As hostages, we substitute ourselves for the other. The notion of da'wah in Islam, I'm beginning to conclude because I know we have 8 minutes and we need to be out of here by 7:30. The notion of da'wah in Islam comes from the root da'at, to call to invite. Da'awat, the root da', to call to invite, has the primary meaning of call to invitation. The sense of invitation to a meal is the many ones that you offered me, as a result of a meal with guests. Da'wat al-mazloom, the prayer of the oppressed always reaches Allah. The da'wah of the Muslim on behalf of another brother, sister, stranger, foreigner, believer is always granted. The word is applied to a da'wah of any kind. As a concluding statement, but I will end with these final last words. They do not belong to me. So, yes, Marcos is gay. Marcos is gay in San Francisco, black in South Africa, an Asian in Europe, a Chicano in San Cathedral, an amethyst in Spain, a Palestinian in Israel, a Mayan Indian on the streets of San Cristobal, a Jew in Germany, a Gypsy in Poland, a Mohawk in Quebec, a pacifist in Bosnia, a single woman on the metro at 10 p.m., a peasant without a land, a gang member in the slums, an unemployed worker, an unhappy student, and of course, a Zapatista in the mountains of Chiapas. Marcos is all the exploited, all the marginalized, all the oppressed minorities resisting and saying, ya basta, enough. He is every minority who is now beginning to speak and every majority that must shut up and listen. He's every untolerated group searching for a way to speak. Everything that makes power and the good consciousness of those in power uncomfortable. This is Marcos. This lecture is dedicated to Sally, to an us, for us to discover together. I am immense gratitude for your patience, for your hospitality, for your kindness. This is to a world where all worlds fit, and this final where all wars fit. God bless you, Jazakumullah khair, and may they reward you more than I can ever put. And to a world that we will, inshallah, will be together. Assalamu alaikum.